All right, everyone, let's get this party started. So I'm Eric Nielsen. I think you've seen my previous videos. I think the last one was, done just audio. So anyway, normally the video lectures will be posted on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, or at the latest in the evening or something. But I'm going to try to have them done by the afternoons, or at least posted. By the afternoons. Just to make a long, boring story short, the last few days, my wife and I have had to temporarily move into a different apartment while work is being done at ours. So anyway, I'm just juggling all these different things, and so now I finally got to sit down and give this lecture. So I did want to go over some things. So again, just a reminder that the Moral Foundations essay, changed the due date for that to October 15th. That should give you time as we read chapter 7 on Hate's Moral Foundations. That will kind of help you write your paper and so on. So anyway, I'll talk about that a little bit more on Tuesday next week. And again, that's due on the 15th. The second exam will be on the 14th, and I'll say something about that in a moment. Let's see, other things that I wanted to go over. Primarily just change in the syllabus that I alluded to, I think, in an email. Let's see. So this is Professor Wall's email. Syllabus. So looking at exam 2, so I did want to just point out that it will only cover chapters 3, 12, and 14. And I just made that change now, and as well as in the syllabus. I also just kind of corrected a couple other discrepancies between my syllabus and then the collection of the list of readings. There was some discrepancies there. So anyway, I think I've mostly taken care of those at this point. So that's kind of what you need to be thinking about now is the next exam. I will be posting a study guide for that tomorrow on Friday later in the day. So which is now, I suppose. But anyway, so watch for that. It'll primarily be, some of the key terms that you might see on the exam. So today I'm going to finish up talking about chapter 14 in cooperation. And I will then move on to talking about groups, and they kind of go together in some way. So we go from talking about the social self, which I talked about in some of those earlier lectures, and then moving back into chapter 14. So let me just do that, bring us here, and make sure everything else is set up where I want it to be. Okay, so last time we had ended, we were talking about the different ways in which, a setting, the social setting, environmental setting, may impact behavior. So, the social environment impacted whether people got directions in a rural versus an urban area, and the religious words and that sort of thing. So we were talking about some of that stuff last time, moving now into talking about evolution. And evolutionarily, how, What does evolution have to say about altruism? Well, from an evolutionary perspective, just strictly thinking about individual genes, the idea is that we should behave altruistically towards those, who promote the survival and reproduction of ourselves and our genetic relatives. Cooperation between non-kin we see in many species, though, from mammals to bacteria, and we actually do see some reciprocity, which I will talk about in a moment. But just this question of altruistic behavior, the one thing that is key when someone risks their life to help others, some stranger, people have done studies about people like that, and how are they raised, what are they like, what's their favorite color, all those sorts of things. And what they find is that a lot of them are raised to care about other people and be compassionate, not be selfish and be selfless and that sort of thing. So a lot of that does seem to be taught. That's something that's socialized. One thing I think about often is a time I went on vacation with my dad and my sister to North Carolina back in the early 2000s. And we, being dumb people from the Midwest at that time, just drove, and we're happy to be at the beach, and didn't really notice that the water was a bit too choppy to get in, and found ourselves caught in an undertow. And it was one of those situations where I was just like, shit, this is it, I'm gonna die here, or and I found myself able to kind of go against the undertow, and I went over and grabbed my sister and was able to pull her to safety. My dad was like struggling back more, and then I went and I pulled him to safety as well. And I should say that at that time amazingly, I have asthma, but I smoked cigarettes at that time. I quit many years ago, but anyway, this was like almost 20 years ago now. But anyway, amazingly, I was the one who saved them, and not the other way around. My sister is much more healthy than me, but nevertheless, maybe something kicked in, and I was able to have a lot of adrenaline and go save my family. And now what I've wondered, though, is would I have done the same thing if I and two strangers would have been trapped in an undertow? Would I have tried to just save myself, or would I have went and tried to save them? And I was raised in a family taught to think altruistically and compassionately, so I'd like to think that I would go and that I would try and save these strangers that were also caught. But maybe I would have just tried to save myself. Maybe I would have been more worried about my own safety and think that, I don't know. I don't know. I don't really remember my rationalization process at the time. Anyway, we'll see in instances, though, of altruistic behavior and cooperation between non-kin in many different species. Excuse me. So, one thing we know is kin selection, this idea of inclusive fitness. And kin selection is this idea that your evolutionary strategy favors the success of one's genetic relatives, even at the cost of one's survival and reproduction. I should say that there's different arguments about selection, the big one being between individual selection and group selection. And you don't actually read it in the hate book for this semester, but if you're interested in that, in that debate, and kind of where Jonathan Haidt comes down. It's in chapter 9, and he comes down very solidly in favor of group selection, and basically says that certain species depend upon, it's all about the group, and nonetheless someone could still argue that it's an individual. But anyway, he makes a very, I think, compelling argument that group selection is at work, and so we're going to just run with that here. But so kin selection would be a form of group selection. Now, the idea here is that inclusive fitness is this idea that that basically you are going to feed and take care of people who are more closely related to you. And so they see that in many different species, like mockingbirds and others, ground squirrels and so on, will do things to help those that are more closely related. Mockingbirds will feed other nestlings, for example, that are more closely related than those that are not. So that's kind of interesting. Ground squirrels also are more likely to warn predators of, warn predators of kin. Got that switched up. Warn kin of predators than they are for just some neighbor ground squirrel down the tunnel that they don't know so well. So it does appear that we're evolutionarily inclined to favor kin, but nevertheless we do see many examples of breaks in this, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So, ground squirrels, danger, there's this, fox that's coming. So what is it, what are these other ground squirrels thinking about? Instead of running away, he warns of the danger. That guy is a hero, like his dad. He too will be remembered because, this guy might be kind of sacrificing. Too bad he has no child. I fear none of us will be brave enough to do that now. Wait a minute. Heroes always die, many of them before having kids. Natural selection should imply that heroes are or will be an extinct kind. But this means, oh my God, we are doomed. So anyway, many different ways in which evolution can sort of play out. Again, just looking at the different levels that you see in social dilemmas, individual selection, the idea here is that it would favor more selfish individual and more selfish behavior. Group selection favors cooperative individuals within selfish groups. So basically, you may, it may not be selfish individuals because the selfish individuals may undermine the goals of the group. So in a situation of group selection, it's what's going to be favored are those cooperative individuals, because they help this group beat all these other groups, and this group will go on to evolve and become super species or whatever. And then perhaps the real world is one more of multi-level selection, where there's some selfish individuals sometimes, but there's also cooperators, but sometimes selfish individuals help cooperators by competition and that sort of thing. So you have outcomes that then depend on this complex balance. And, like I said, Haidt comes down really arguing for the importance of group selection. But I think he also recognizes that, there's multi-level selection going on, but he's kind of arguing against the kind of focus on individual selection. I think there's within kind of the popular understanding of natural selection. A lot of it, is just kind of a very simplified understanding of individual selection, and hate saying no, we're humans and other social animals, really there's a lot of group selection going on, but he recognizes that there's a lot of levels that we see. Okay, so reciprocity then. So reciprocity, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, and literally that's sometimes what we see other primates do. You groom that monkey over there, that monkey will come over and groom you, etc., etc. So we know that reciprocity, the way it usually works is, there's this sort of exchange there that, if you help someone, they're going to help you at another time, especially when you're dealing with non-relatives, that really, with non-relatives, it really relies upon, the success of a social society, community, species, whatever, relies upon, relatives being able to reciprocate. Well, what about reciprocal altruism then? And this is helping others with the expectation that they will probably return the favor sometime in the future. Well, there's been some interesting studies done on that. The most interesting on vampire bats. So here, vampire bats, it's October now, I guess, there's vampire bats out there, gonna come and attack us and drink our blood. No, they usually, come attack cows and, take a very small amount of blood, enough to fill a little pouch. They don't take down cows or something like that. But so vampire bats, and what they're actually doing is they're not going down on these cows and getting their blood for themselves. They're, getting that blood and holding it in pouches and taking it back to their little bat colony or whatever. And what bats will do then is you'll see reciprocal altruism, where they will come back and they will not only feed their own baby bats, but they'll feed, some of the other bats, baby bats, and then the next time some other mother bat goes out and, attacks a cow and gets some blood, comes back, and they will give it to that mother, they will give it to all the other baby bats. So that's an example of reciprocal altruism. But how do you test that? So the experiments were kind of fascinating. So what they did, some researcher was out there and would grab one of these mother bats that was going out to get food for everyone, and they would have this syringe and fill their pouches with air and then put them back in the bat nest. And so the bat cave, probably, right? So anyway, this bat would go in there and, she wouldn't have any blood or anything, but she'd be back there with these enlarged pouches. And the other mother bats would see that and they would be like, hey, she's got all that blood and she's not feeding our kids. What's up with that? That's really kind of a crappy thing to do. That's not how we do things in our bat colony here. And so then what they do is they monitor the other bats, and what they find is that the next time the bats go out to get blood, they will come back and they will feed everyone else's babies except that mother who had her whose pouches were filled with air by that researcher. So, really kind of a fascinating experiment there. And these were believed to be non-kin relatives. Now, there's been some studies, now there's some disagreement about the relatedness and how, the blood distribution and these bat networks and whatnot. But anyway, that's a kind of a interesting, now classic study about on reciprocal altruism. One of the other things that Haight talks about in chapter 9 is this idea of shared intentionality. And I know you don't read chapter 9, but the idea of shared intentionality is this idea that we as humans were able to convey to each other that we share the same intention, the same goals, that sort of thing. Now, I think early belief was that this came about through language, that we were able to, express to one another, like, hey, give me that stick so I can hit that, whatever, saber-toothed tiger. But but it had to have happened long before language. Language obviously, then took off, and shared intentionality took off, and so on. But one of the things that we believe now, one of the early markers of shared intentionality are the ways that our eyes look as compared with a chimpanzee. Now we've seen examples now of chimpanzees cooperate, but not very often. They're not a very cooperative species. They do cooperate in aggressive attacks, which we'll talk about when we talk about aggression. But for the most part, they're not as cooperative as we are, certainly. And unless forced to, they really don't cooperate very often. And one of the reasons our eyes look different than a lot of these non-cooperative chimps, even though we're so closely related, is that our eyes probably evolved the way they did before our language did, our capacity for language. And so with our eyes, we're able to, communicate, expressions. And the whites, the reasons, whatever, I'm going blank on my anatomy now, the whites of our eyes. The reason that they're white is because, it makes it easier for us to, communicate with our eyes. And, over the last year and a half, we've done a lot of communication with our eyes, as we've worn masks during the pandemic and so on. I've had to find myself communicating with my eyes more, especially because my voice sounds like a weasel dying of a sinus infection normally, and then with a mask it's even harder to hear. So anyway, cooperation is what Haight really says is key. I think there's a lot of fascinating work on cooperation right now. Some of the early kind of classic work on this, Christopher Bohm, Hierarchy in the Forest, the Evolution of Egalitarian Behavior, Moral Origins, the Evolution of Virtue, Altruism, and Shame. So the arguments here being that egalitarian behavior, fairness, this sort of thing, developed as a way in which, certain social species cooperated. Now, this kind of goes against the ideas of, it doesn't go against, I should say, but let me kind of change gears here. Garrett Hardin, a famous biologist, looked at population. He developed this metaphor called the tragedy of the commons, and basically his whole idea was that the world is becoming more and more populated, and it's going to mean that nobody shares, and we're all doomed, and so on and so forth. And so the idea being here that people will just use up selfishly resources, and so on and so forth. And, he was proven wrong by Elinor Ostrom and many other researchers, but he did have this interesting sort of metaphor. And the tragedy of the commons is this idea that, you give everyone, a sheep to have on this communal pasture, then somebody adds a couple more, and then pretty soon other people see that they add more and are getting more wool, and they start doing the same thing until there's no more land left. Well, the thing is, in reality, except for ocean fishing, overfishing in the oceans, we find that in most situations, whether it's like the management of the Colorado River in Southern California's water, or villages and resource use of local resource forest use in Tanzania or something. Decades of research have now shown that we don't actually see the tragedy of the commons very often. So, if there's a test question about do we see the tragedy of the commons very often, you know what the answer is because you listen to the lecture, because it doesn't quite show up in the slides. So we are more cooperative than, this very influential Garrett Hardin led a lot of people to believe. And I should say that he published that article on the tragedy of the commons in 1968, and it's become one of the most read papers in history, taught to millions of undergraduates over the decades, and like I said, has been proven to be inaccurate. But most people think that, we're just basically using up resources until they're gone, and we are using up resources and over exploiting and all of that, but it's not happening in that sort of way that he said, where we'd just be rationally just kind of selfishly just destroying things and no restraints whatsoever, that kind of thing. In outside of overfishing, we do see that there is a lot of different arrangements that are made, even if they do end up in exploitation. Okay, anyway. So when it comes to looking at cooperation, a lot of stuff was being done back in the early 1970s, and a political scientist, Robert Axelrod, came up with did this major study called the evolution of cooperation, and has then expanded upon that. And so basically what it does is we look at the prisoner's dilemma. So some of you may be familiar with this. Excuse me. The idea being that, okay, so this is the scenario. There are two guys who are arrested for, they're trying to break out of prison or something, and they have to figure out what to do. They're interrogated separately, and, should I confess? And, the other one's thinking, has he confessed? Is what's going on. So what you get then when you break it down formally is basically there are four possible outcomes. Both people could cooperate. They both could, cooperate with the police, or both could cheat, squeal on each other. Individual A could cooperate, and B could cheat or defect, is what is often said. Both could cheat, defect, and then let's see. Wait, I already said that. No, I'm sorry. I got that backwards. I'm going to rewind that for a moment. Four possible outcomes. One is that both individuals cooperate. The other being that, okay, back again. So, let me go through that again. I sort of lost myself in myself. Okay, so four possible outcomes. One is that both individuals cooperate with the police. One is that both defect or cheat on each other and squeal. One is that individual A cooperates and B cheats and squeals. The other is that B cooperates and the other cheats. So what you get then, you could also see the payoffs, and sometimes this is done through money. Then I think you can see better how it would affect you. So here's you can cooperate, here's your partner in the green. And so if you both cooperate, you each get $5. That's not a bad outcome. However, if you defect, you cheat and they don't, if they, whatever, they don't, they don't cooperate with the police, they don't get the $8. I know this is not how our legal system works. This is a very weird, corrupt legal, criminal justice system. So anyway, say then that you cheat, as I said, you get $8, they don't get anything. So for the best thing that works out for you would be to defect and have them cooperate. If you both defect, then you both get $2. You both get something, but it's not much. So in other words, the best situation for everyone is cooperation, and so on. Now, as I said, we see that, whoops, let me get back to where I was. Okay. Now, what we see happen is something called tit for tat. After a while, and this is where Axelrod really kind of took off. He was looking at trying to figure out what was the best way to do this, because you can sort of play this different ways and so on, cooperation and stabbing in the back, and what's the best way in which to do this. If you're sort of like playing a game of this where you cooperate and defect and cooperate, and there's several rounds of this. So what Axelrod did was he ran this tournament in which the players, and he got a bunch of people together, academics, computer people, common folk, maybe some murderers. No, I don't think he got murderers. Maybe he did. I don't know. But anyway, he got a bunch of people together, and they were all invited to submit. I should say first he put it on a computer, and this is back in like the 1970s, so a very old computer. But he had them play, and he had them send the program that had their their strategy that they believed was best. And what happened was that this strategy emerged that basically beat out all the others, and he ran basically this round robin tournament where all the different strategies were paired against each other, and this strategy emerged called tit for tat. Basically what it means is you cooperate on the first round with every opponent, and then reciprocate with whatever the opponent did on the previous round. So you cooperate, say they defect and you cooperate, and then they cooperate, and you cooperate, and then they defect, and then you defect. They defect again, and you defect again, but then they cooperate again, and you cooperate again. That was shown to be the most successful. And why was that? Well, one, it was very cooperative. And, as I said, we tend to be actually a very cooperative species. And this is, kind of one of the things that came out of this research. Also, not envious. So basically, you're not necessarily competing. So there's none of that going on. It's not necessarily exploitable. Basically, if the other person defects, then you defect. If they defect again, then you defect again. If they cooperate, and then you cooperate, and so on and so forth. And so, you're just basically, kind of tracking them and so on. It's also forgiving. It's willing to cooperate even after several defections, and even after, like, say they defect like 5 times in a row, and very aggressive and so on and so forth. But then they cooperate and you cooperate again, and then he's back. It's like you forgive all those defections. So that was seen as being very, very fascinating. But something can happen, and what if there is a signal error? So this was being played by like people in diplomacy and political science and economics and stuff like that. And if any of you have ever seen the old movie that was probably made about the same time that this was coming out, and maybe in fact inspired by it, War Games with Matthew Broderick, and made in like the early 1980s. But it's basically, he's like this early hacker, and he hacks into the Pentagon or something, and he gets into this program where the computer system that now manages nuclear missiles starts to think that it's going against the Soviet Union, and it starts to play these different scenarios of attacks and counterattacks and attacks and counterattacks and so on and so forth. And anyway, the main story, I don't want to ruin the movie in case you want to ever watch it, but basically it the kind of what it's kind of showing there is this sort of prisoner's dilemma being played out there, where you have this sort of mutual assured destruction, because it's this tit for tat that's going on. However, one thing that happens is signal error, and that's basically like, what if the Russians thought that you were actually going to attack, and they start gearing up their forces and so on. So what emerged then was an adjustment of tit for tat called forgiving tit for tat. Usual rules, but this time if there is something where they're going to just keep on being aggressive or something, you be forgiving in one round and then cooperate. Basically you defect and then you cooperate again. I might be getting that wrong. You may want to look it up. It's called forgiving tit for tat, and you forgive in one round and then you cooperate to get it back on track, and it basically magically makes that happen. Anyway, one person who really did a lot of interesting research. A lot of game theory is what Prisoner's Dilemma is, and there's other variations of it. And she used this to kind of test Hardin's Tragedy of the Commons, and she basically disproved it, which I guess I do talk about here. And interestingly, she was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in economics. So she went on to do decades of research, and her students and colleagues did too. If you want to read about it, she went out and did like ethnographic research and interviewing people, observations of tribes and police departments and offices and clergy and all sorts of different groups around the world, and she came up with this idea of common pool resources. But anyway, if you're ever interested in maybe how, in resource use, sort of the, kind of the nuts and bolts of resource use and game theory and this sort of thing, Eleanor Ostrom is, a name to know. Anyway, game theory now is, it's in all sorts of fields, and finance and algorithmic construction and things like that. Some of the classic books on Prisoner's Dilemma, John von Neumann, famous computer scientist, mathematician, and so on. Herbert Gintes, famous social scientist, fantastic book on game theory and how it kind of can bring together a lot of different disciplines, and kind of why it's kind of a big deal. Anyway, let's see. So, looking at this international study that was done where there's like a cheater and a negative, and there's something that they're doing, some game or something, and someone cheats, and they're maybe it is even prisoner's dilemma, but in game theory, they find that it varies in terms by culture in terms of how much resources they were willing to spend to punish a cheater or a free rider. So basically, everybody averaged the same percentage of resources in terms of what they were willing to spend to punish a cheater. That was one of the big findings. Another was that antisocial punishments, they spent resources to punish someone for being overly generous, if they're giving too much of their goods away, usually a third player or something like that. This was found to be lowest in the Scandinavian countries, which are like always very cooperative, or they're found to be very cooperative for interesting reasons, some of it having to do with cultural and ethnic homogeneity. The Scandinavian languages are not easy ones to learn. Trust me, I know. My name is Eric Solvad Nielsen. Anyway, other things that they found kind of interesting, there were sort of in-between groups in the Middle East and Eastern Europe. The worst rates were in Greece and the Arabic Emirates. Here, people were willing to spend more to do antisocial punishment to punish cheaters, and they linked it to how much trust was in those societies. So. Greece and the Arabic Emirates had the worst rates in some of these big studies that were done. Well, when we talk about groups, one thing that we'll be talking about in great detail in terms of why people might cooperate is, well, one reason might be reputation. Humans we care about our status, and that may play a big role. So, well, reputation, how is our reputation made? How is it constructed? Through gossip, So, gossip is, something that, we may say we get annoyed by. But even I say, like, yeah, I don't care about gossip, but sometimes I do when it's interesting or something. And why is that? Deep evolutionary reasons why we sit and snicker at the lunch table in high school or whatever, and later on in life and on social media and wherever. It's because this is how we talk about the reputation, and that goes back to our primate relatives, that mother bat is terrible, it doesn't give any of its blood to the rest of the babies in the commune. Not primates, I know, but our primate relatives would basically, essentially, it would be about, they've done studies basically where there is, where they can look at reputations, and how it can influence things. One interesting example that I forgot to give, along with like vampire bats, another interesting example of where they started to see the cooperation stuff. They weren't understanding the reciprocity that was going on. So they found species where they were wondering, it wasn't always the case. Lions, prides of lions, they found were exceptions to the rule. The species called the naked mole rat was an exception to the rule. And what's interesting about the naked mole rat is that they are the closest to like an insect, like a social insect, like an ant or a bee or something, of the mammals. And they have like, I think they are mainly in Africa, and they have underground like tunnels and colonies and stuff. And anyway, so researchers were studying them and noticing, all this cooperative behavior going on, sharing of food and so on. And then these bigger naked mole rats that are eating a lot, but they're not going out to get any, they're not sharing any of it. And, researchers were like, what's going on here? This is kind of strange. They're not, what are they doing? Why are they not getting, why are they getting food and, not contributing? What's going on here? Are naked mole rats just kind of dumb or something? And then they noticed that during like at a certain time of the year, certain season or whatever, these big rats, naked mole rats who have been like gorging all season, they go up and, they're worried about predators and, the elements and whatnot. And these big naked mole rats go up and they have been enlarging themselves so they can stick their rear ends out the hole in the tunnel, and that's their purpose of in the colony, is to kind of use their butts to keep everyone safe. So anyway, interesting examples of altruism, of reciprocal altruism, that where it's not just a one-on-one cooperative game going on, but you actually have, several different games going on, lots of different ways in which cooperation happens. Okay, so I meant to say that a couple of slides ago. Anyway, gossip. So we're a gossipy species. And as I said, we've seen, and there's evidence in Prisoner's Dilemma. So they have found that, basically the people, if they're paired with another person to play the sort of Prisoner's Dilemma or something like it, when they're told that the person that they're playing with is known to be a cooperator, they're more likely to cooperate with that person. So, we see some evidence for it there. Also, I think this is fascinating. I think it's is it just like kind of like Monopoly or something. Anyway, they had this game. Researchers had this game. Both of them, the games were exactly the same. Everything, the boards and the purpose of the game and everything was the same. The only difference was that one was called Wall Street and the other was called Community. And, it was really fascinating because they found, they had people play them and, they had enough people, different groups of people play them, that they found that, the big difference was that people who played the community game cooperated twice as often as those playing the Wall Street game. Even though the rules were the same, everything was the same. The only difference was the name. I think that's rather fascinating. Again, just the tit-for-tat strategy, I guess I kind of went over that. Anyway, just you can look at that on the slides. I guess back there I got a bit ahead of myself. So anyway, these are... Whoa, what's happened here? Okay, if you look at the notes here, these are the 5 ways why tit for tat's so successful. I've got 3 of them listed here, and I forgot to evidently put in the next 2. Oh, wait. I got the next 2, but not the final one. So anyway, so anyway, you can go over those on your own. And for Oh, for just in terms of, when we think about, I know we're reading hate and, thinking deeply about the how morality and politics come together. Just some other kind of works in that regard, Hope in the Dark, The Monarchy of Fear, and kind of looking at, these historical moments and, how times of chaos can bring out, a lot of altruism and cooperation and things like that. And these are pre-COVID books. Upheaval, Jared Diamond, very famous scientist, speaks like 12 languages, trained as an ornithologist, but has done, some, groundbreaking work in the social sciences as well. He has a recent book called Upheaval, where he looks at nations that are in crisis, and he looks at crisis counseling and how principles from crisis counseling can be used to look at sort of national issues. And so we can, look at obviously social psychology and these broader social institutions, but we can also look at, what we can learn from individuals to help us learn about institutions. Because at the end of the day, all institutions are groups of people who kind of are following certain rules and, ways of behavior, schemas. They have certain schemas that align, and so on. And a lot of this depends on how we look at other people. And, later on in the course, we're going to be talking about, the very opposite of cooperation, aggression and, aggression that's, that's just kind of pure malice. And, that's the sort of genocidal aggression. And I've spent a lot of time looking at this. We're going to be talking about the authoritarian personality, as well as new research that's been done that kind of updates this classic study from the 1950s that had a few flaws here and there. So anyway, as George Herbert Mead may have said, nobody is always stupid, but everyone is stupid sometimes. So you can take the social psych message from that as however you want. I do want to get us started, though, talking about what was I talking about? Talking about groups. So the slides, you've got the slides there, or I will open that that block up. Oh, the other thing I should mention, I hate having to mention this halfway more towards the end of the lecture, but I do know that the module dates are kind of weird too, and so anyway, hopefully it doesn't cause too many problems. So anyway, so we are jumping now sort of backwards in the book, going from cooperation now to looking at groups. So again, if you're... anyway, never mind. We'll just talk about groups. So groups, one of the first studies in social psychology, actually the first experiment in social psychology was looking at how people perform in the presence of others. So social facilitation. Initially, this was a term for the enhanced performance in the presence of others. Now it's kind of a broader term for the effect, positive or negative, of others on performance. So he found one of his early studies, well, I'm jumping ahead of myself. I'm riding ahead of myself here. And let's see, gotta make sure. Okay, so back in 1898, this guy, Norm Triplett, isn't that right? Am I getting his first name right? Not that it incredibly matters. Yes, Norman Triplett did this research in 1898, the first social psychology experiment. So he noticed that cyclists recorded faster times when they were competing against another cyclist rather than when they were racing on their own. And so he designed an experiment to test, whether the presence of others facilitates human performance. And so, big term here is social facilitation. This is for when performance is enhanced in terms of, or initially meant enhanced by the presence of others, how it makes us do something better. Now it refers to basically any form of impact that others have on our performance at some given task. So we did that research using bicyclists. He also did another project where he got some kids together and told them to go fishing, gave them rods and reels, and he sat there kind of, just watching them. And what he was really interested in is when they were reeling them in. And he was interested in kind of how fast they would. And he found that those that would, be next to another kid would reel faster than some kid who was off over on like another side of the lake alone, reeling their fish in, or just their hook without anything there. So he was doing this and watching these kids for a while, and this was kind of like the second big study that they found. And so again, he concluded that the presence there for facilitates the performance, and he coined the term social facilitation. Now, this has been found, experiments have been done that find this happening in a whole range of species: opossums, various kinds of fish, frogs, cats and dogs, and so on and so forth. Not always, though. Not always humans. Humans don't always follow this either. So, in about 20 years after Triplett's initial research, Floyd Allport, not Gordon, the other famous psychologist, Floyd Allport, found that undergrads refute philosophical statements better when they are alone than when they are in the presence of others. So also this happens with memory and arithmetic. I know this happened with me. I can, work out some statistical thing in my office, but then sometimes if I'm in the classroom, in front of a couple hundred people, it's a little bit different. I suddenly am like, I suddenly am more likely to make an error. So anyway, sometimes, so he did research and he finding that, sometimes actually, the presence of someone there can impede performance. So what's, excuse me. So, what's the answer here? What does it mean for humans? Are they more likely is the presence of others more likely to facilitate our performance, or is it more likely to cause problems? So here comes a major social psychologist, Robert Zients, and it's kind of, his name's pronounced like science, but Zients. So Zients found that, that it's more complicated than that. That the presence of others increases arousal, basically, and arousal increases our dominant response. And so our dominant response, I'll talk about in a moment, but basically he's saying that the presence of others, basically, it can actually help us on simple tasks or tasks that we're good at, but that are well learned, that we know well. But it hinders our performance on difficult or novel tasks. And so as I said, he used this term. Where am I going? I'll just go here for now. Dominant response. That basically, in this sort of like hierarchy of things that you could do in response to any context, like someone rings on your doorbell. The first thing you might do is look out the keyhole or something. Something you're not likely to do is just open the door and punch the person in the face without knowing who they are. That's not a likely response. Or dominant response if you're a mathematician and you're no, I got that wrong. That's a bad example. Don't listen to me there. But basically, it's the response you're most likely to make in a certain situation, well-practiced task. You're more likely to do is more likely to be correct, but the dominant response may not be correct for a novel or a difficult task. I'll give examples, and we'll talk about this in more detail in a moment. So the presence of others has an effect on us, arousal of various physiological, psychological stuff. This increases the dominant response tendencies. So simple or well-learned tasks, things that we know, we're likely to do better, here's an example, if you're like a star football player, and there's more people around you, chances are you'll do better than if you're just playing by yourself, or nobody's there, there's no crowd cheering you on. Your performance is facilitated. However, say you're a star football player, but you're really bad at baseball, and someone decides to throw you into this baseball team, and all of a sudden, you're in this stadium, and there's all these people, same number of people that, in your football stadium were helping you score an extra touchdown. Here, they're making you strike out. Basically, they're maybe you're okay at baseball, but not that great. But here, with all the pressure, all the people, your performance is impaired. There I am. I got that with a good sports metaphor. Okay. So how to test this theory? So first of all, he did it. He did a very interesting experiment, not using humans, using those creatures that will outlive humans once the apocalypse happens. According to all the apocalyptic fiction from like the 1950s to still maybe today, the cockroach, of course. So he did this fascinating experiment, and this is in your book. So he got this maze together where he got a cockroach and cockroaches, and he got this light here, and the idea is to get the cockroach, whoa, get the cockroach back on the screen. The idea here is to, get the cockroach to get to the goal as fast as possible. And so, you turn on the light, cockroaches are like, you want to run away, they're exposed. So they run quickly to the goal when it's this simple maze, this simple task. Now you make it a bit more complex. You add, this other runway here. So, now, they can't just run here. So, complex maze, it's kind of hard for them to get there, but, they eventually still, make it over there. But not as easily, because they might go down this way first and over here, then we gotta go this way now. So then, you decided to say, well, so that's kind of interesting. We see that difference there with simple and complex, mazes and the cockroach behavior. Well, let's see how they do around their cockroach buddies or peers. And so they, when they have another peer with them, it turns out this tends to, seems to kind of, doesn't have a huge impact on their performance, but they're able to excuse me, they're able to make it through. They got their cockroach buddy there, like, yeah, we can make it. However, when you put them into the complex maze, and he decided to make this experiment a little bit more interesting, so he got like these plexiglass little things, he called them stands. So here he's, you've got the bleachers full of their cockroach buddies, and this one cockroach sees that all these, his cockroach brethren are there, and the light's there, and all of a sudden, his average time is actually, kind of, it goes up, because he's got his cockroach buddies there to help him, get through, get through the task. No, I've got that wrong. I'm sorry. When there's the cockroach buddies around, they make it through the simple maze quicker. When the cockroach buddies are around, they make it through the complex maze a little bit slower than when they were alone. So, fascinating study that science did there. The cockroach bleachers, hindered the performance on the complex maze. Well, okay, so that's cockroach behavior, but what about humans? Well, we can see something similar. So he decided to, go and get some, have some of his grad students go out and see how their presence affected the pool playing ability of some pool players. And so he went and he had them basically go and, find students that were basically deemed to be skilled pool players and unskilled. So, just watch people playing pool at the pool hall or bar or whatever for a little while. And then, he found that, he would kind of notice, they would notice whether there was an audience there or not. And they would find that sometimes audience made good players do better and poor players do worse. Now, when the observer moved closer to to the pool table and continued to watch, the skilled pool players, so the ones that were good, they improved by about 14% on average, and the unskilled players, when someone moved closer to watch, they actually got worse by about 30%. So again, social facilitation can have a big influence, the way in which it influences you can vary a little bit. Okay, so I think I will stop there for today, and then continue talking about this on Tuesday's lecture, and I will post the study guide first thing when I wake up, or shortly thereafter, and so that will show up, and I'll be available through email if you have any questions regarding the exam. All right, everyone, have a good weekend, and I look forward to reading more of your pack back this weekend.